Hi, my name is Dylan Hillman, and I'm the head of training and systems here at Sol-Ark. And today I have one of our local Texas installers here to do part of our certification program. If you guys are interested in doing a program like this yourselves, please reach out to training@sol-ark.com or check out our website for more details. Hi, guys.
Hey, we're Sunshine Renewable Solutions. I'm Jeff Shedd, the owner.
I'm Cody, Director of Field Operations.
And we do solar installations all across Texas. We've been working a lot with Sol-Ark. We love them. And we've been trying out a bunch of different battery systems, and we're really excited to be here today and do the training with these guys.
All right, let's get started. All right, guys, so right now we're going to go through and do a basic commissioning. So this is your wiring's already done, and you just want to get the system turned on and working for your customer. So we're going to show you exactly how easy this is to do. I'm going to come in here. This is your home screen, and there's a little gear icon in the upper right-hand corner. So if you touch that, you're going to go into this other menu here with basic setup, battery setup, grid setup, and system alarms. Now, if you have any beeping or anything like that going on at this point in the game, you're going to want to jump into basic setup real quick and disable beep. That just helps you, hear yourself think, and then you can go through and debug the problem. Go ahead and give us a call if you do run into an issue. Support 972-575-8875, extension number 2. We have English and Spanish. And then once you're in here, you can do stuff like time. If you want to change the time for the system, you can go into advanced, and you can set up a whole bunch of good stuff here. But just for today's exercise, the first thing you want to do in basic setup is make sure that auto dim is enabled. That's required if you want your screen to have warranty on it. If you don't enable that, it will burn out over time. So just make sure that that's selected. That's pretty much all you need to do in basic setup for now. And remember, if you're changing a setting, you do need to press OK for it to stay. And then you jump into battery settings. If you do have a battery, you're going to want to set the capacity in amp hours. So you just touch the box, you'll see a cursor, and then you can go up and down with the arrow keys here. And you're going to go through your capacity, your maximum amps charge, or max A charge, discharge, and the temperature coefficient. So the first three you should be able to get from the spec sheet from your battery company. And then your temperature coefficient, usually it's going to be 0 for lithium and about -5 for anything lead acid. Over here on the right, you can choose if you want to view your battery in terms of voltage or percentage. And then if you don't have a battery, you need to select no battery, or else your system will never stop beeping at you.
Those alarms.
Yeah, the alarms. Lastly, you got some BMS lithium battery here. If you do have a lithium battery that is capable of comms, you can plug it into the battery port in the user area here, and you can select this, and then it'll be in the manual for which number you need to select. But if you do have that, you can click this, click that box over here to get the cursor, and select which mode you need to be in for your battery. So that's the first BAT tab that you'll want to do. You'll have to press OK to save any settings in here, by the way. If you do not press OK and you just start navigating elsewhere, it will not save the settings. So do make sure that you press OK at the end of each tab. Next, we're going to go to the charge tab. That's one tab over. And here you can control the charge rate from different power sources. So you have your grid charge settings and you have your gen charge settings. And you can change the number of amps that are coming from each one of those sources. The important thing here is that this is amps at the battery's voltage. This is not AC amps. So you're going to be able to crank it all the way up to 185 for a 12K, all the way to 275 for 15K or whatever model you have.
As long as it doesn't exceed the battery, correct?
As long as it doesn't exceed the battery.
Yeah.
So if you need to limit this in the first tab, the battery tab, your max A charge and your max A discharge are global limits. So if you set those appropriately for your battery, you will not be able to exceed those values anywhere else in the GUI, graphical user interface, screen, anywhere in the screen. So back on this charge tab here, you can enable or disable grid charge or gen charge. Now this is not referring to exactly where the power is coming from. It's referring to which port you're using to get that power from. So we have a generator input breaker and we have a grid input breaker, and that's what it's referring to. So if you hook a generator up to the grid breaker, you'll still need to enable grid charge, even though it is actually a generator. And then we have the start voltage or start percentage here. One of them is going to be highlighted in, one of them is going to be editable and listed in white, and the other will be listed in gray. And that's just depending on if you're viewing things in voltage or percentage. So only one of them can be changed at a time, depending on what mode you're in. And this is going to determine when the Sol-Ark will use its 2-wire start to call for a generator. So if you do have a generator, you have a 2-wire start compatible generator, and you want that to turn on it, the default here is set to 49.5 volts. So if the battery gets to 49.5 volts, it'll call for your generator. Now technically it has to be below this for 1 minute, and it does adjust for how many amps you're pulling out of the battery in real time using the another setting that we're going to get to here in a moment. But anyways, yeah, so that's what those settings are there. And this is also a very important section on the right hand side of this screen. You have your float, absorb, equalize, equalize hours and voltage, and days. So these are going to be settings that you're going to get from the spec sheet of whatever battery that you're using. So go ahead and just use your manufacturer recommended settings here. We do have a lot of the common brands in the Sol-Ark manual, but I do recommend, we recommend that you go to your actual manufacturer's website, get their spec sheet, and program it accordingly.
Is it necessary to put these in? Would it be messed up? Would the system mess up if we didn't put them in?
So potentially, yes, you could hurt the battery if you don't change these settings. These days, with all the latest software versions, units that are shipping out for the last year or so, we've defaulted these settings to approximately lithium iron phosphate chemistry. We used to default to lead acid chemistry, but basically if you have a battery that isn't the default chemistry and you're using the default settings, it's probably not the end of the world in like a day, but it would cause problems over time potentially. Again, you want to change this as part of the commissioning. So before you actually use the system heavily, you'll definitely want to change these things. And you got stuff in here like your generator cycle date and time, so you can set, a lot of generators need to be exercised over time, so you can set a time, you can schedule a time for the system to call for the generator just to keep it exercised. And you can adjust that with these values here. Moving right along to the discharge tab. So here we have that setting that I alluded to earlier, which is the battery resistance. So that's going to be in milliohms, and we use that value to, in real time, do Ohm's law adjustments for all your set points if you're in voltage mode. So if you're pulling a whole bunch of amps out, we're going to allow that voltage to drop accordingly based off how much resistance you've programmed into the unit and so on. So if you ever think that your generator should be kicking on right now because the voltage is where you set it to, but you're actually pulling a bunch of power out of the battery, this is why it hasn't triggered yet. Your battery's not really at that level because you're pulling 100 amps out or something.
Mm-hmm.
Using it at the time.
Trying to start those AC units and things like that.
Exactly, that kind of thing. So that's an important one to set. Again, you're going to get that spec from your manufacturer of your battery, and it does tend to go down with the more batteries you have in parallel. Okay. These settings here on the left, we have shutdown, low battery, and restart with a battery empty voltage at the bottom. So shutdown voltage, or percentage, is going to be if the battery gets to that point, the inverter is going to cease AC output, so it's going to shut down. Low battery serves a couple different purposes, but it's mostly a warning. It'll make the icon on the front screen, the battery icon, turn yellow, just kind of saying, hey, your battery's getting low. It also functions as the lower boundary if you're using peak shaving mode. It won't peak shave below low battery. And then the restart voltage only comes into play if you've already hit shutdown. So if you hit shutdown, we're going to wait to turn back on until we hit the restart voltage. And we do that so that there's a big enough gap between when it turns back on to power up your loads and when it shuts off. Because if those two numbers are too close to each other, you can imagine it would just, kind of oscillate. And then lastly, we have the battery empty voltage. This is a very important setting that you're also going to get from your manufacturer. But this is a hard line in the sand for if we hit this voltage, we're going to turn off the inverter. And we do this to protect the battery because we want the inverter to turn off before the battery's BMS turns off. And a lot of the BMSs have like a hard line voltage sensor for whenever they shut down. So you don't want the battery to turn off while we're trying to power a load. You want it to be the other way around. It's more graceful. And so that's why we have this setting. There's also, this is actually a really good one too, the BMS air stop. So if you have that enabled and your BMS has communications with the system and there's like a blip in the communication, if that's on, it'll shut the inverter down as an alarm. Usually you don't want that. And the reason we're going through all these battery settings now, even if you have a lithium battery that tells the inverter what settings it needs to have, which is cool, you still want to do this manual process also, because if the communications ever lapsed for any reason, it's going to default to whatever it was programmed to. So if it's already programmed to the right settings, if there's a blip in the communication with the battery, you don't need to throw an alarm, everything's okay. So usually we'll just leave that off if you've done the proper programming ahead of time. And then battery efficiency is exactly what you think it is. another spec you'll get from your manufacturer. And smart load, I'm not going to go into tons of detail here because this is just a quick commissioning video, but this is going to allow you to control the generator breaker. The generator breaker is both an input or an output, depending on what you program it to. And this is where you're going to adjust those settings. So you can either put AC coupling in, you can put a generator in, or you can use it as a kind of a load shedding out.
Okay. So this is where we're going to adjust if we've got a generator, if we've got something like an in-phase or solar edge system in there. Different PV system, correct?
Yeah, so if you're doing a retrofit and the customer already has, like 7 kW of PV up on the roof with microinverters or like an in-phase or something like that, you can just pipe that right in to the generator input and the Sol-Ark will control it.
Very cool. And you said load shedding as well?
Yes, so it's either or, not both at the same time, but if you didn't have to AC couple, you could use it as a smart load output, and that's going to let you pick some settings on here so that if your battery gets below this set point, we will cease powering the load or the gen breaker, so you can have it's automatic load shedding.
Gotcha.
With
so
the
when
gen
the
breaker.
grid goes off, it'll shut down that panel as well?
So you can. It depends on how you program it. So over the years we've added quite a few features here. So you can have it set to where when the grid's on, the gen breaker is always on as well, operating as a smart load, as a load output. And then when the grid goes out, depending on what your settings are here, it'll either power it for a little bit and then turn it off to preserve battery, or it'll turn off right away, or not at all.
Gotcha.
So you can set these different triggers here. So you can say if you're using it as a load output, then your smart load on value would need to be the high one, and the smart load off value would be the low one. So in this case, we would continue to power the loads with the default settings here until the battery got to 80%, and then we would shed the loads on the gen breaker to prioritize whatever's on the load breaker if the grid's out.
Gotcha. Very cool.
Yeah, and then you kind of use the same boxes. The text here isn't actually going to change if you go between load output and AC coupled input, which can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So just know that the text doesn't change, but the meaning of the box does. So if we're in a load output mode, it'll work just as I described. If you're in an AC coupled mode, these set points are kind of reversed because you want the AC coupled panels to turn off before you get to full battery,
Right.
and then back on again as you get lower. As opposed to with a load, you want it to be the reverse. So just know that. And that sums up the battery setup tab. Next up will be the grid setup tab. And in the first tab here, that's called limiter, this is where you're going to pick the mode of the inverter. So if you want the inverter to, sell to the grid only, you would pick grid cell. If you'd like it to, discharge the battery and offset your home bill during the day, you do time of use. And you can get pretty fancy with all these settings because you can have them several different modes on at the same time to get different functionality. So one of the more complicated ones, and also the most popular way that this is set up, is to have grid cell, limited to home, and time of use on all at the same time. And basically what that does is if you have excess power during the day, it's going to first charge your battery, then power the house, and then if there's above and beyond that, it'll sell it to the grid. And then at night, it will discharge your battery to try and offset just your home loads. And the way we do that is with the external CT sensors that are put in over by just downstream of the meter. And that way we measure how much power the home is using. And then we only sell back that much from the battery at night. Whereas during the day, we're allowing it to push back even more because you get more credit for it whenever you're making power. So that's the most popular way to do it. And you can get in here and you can get really fancy, probably beyond the scope of this video. But you can have it set to do different things at different times, trigger different stuff, turn on your generator, don't turn on your generator, all based on time cues. You can also limit the output of the inverter here, which is pretty cool. With this box next to grid cell, that's kind of a global AC output limit for the grid breaker. Yeah, so if you guys have any more questions or you want to learn more about our time of use functionality or this screen in general, we have some videos that we'll link above. So, yeah, so that's going to be the limiter tab. Cell control, as a general commissioning video, you usually don't have to change much, if anything, in here. Usually you'll leave it in UL 1741 SA mode, and battery first is going to be default, and I think appropriate for the vast majority of installs. If you do have a generator and you're using it on the grid input breaker, you do need to select this setting here, gen connected to grid input. That way we know to look for a generator, because obviously you can't sell back to a generator. It's going to be different than the grid, so we need to know if that's a possibility. So if you do have one of those, just go ahead and select that. The rest of these settings, usually you shouldn't mess with. Grid reconnect time, power factor.
So if it's completely an off-grid system, you can connect the generator into the grid port?
Oh yeah. In fact, we recommend it. So if it is a primarily off-grid application, we do recommend you put it into the grid breaker so that you don't lose the extra functionality of the gen breaker. Because that way you can have
you can still put in PV.
You could still have an AC coupled solution, or you could use it as a load shedding without losing it.
Very cool.
So.
Very smart.
So that's the cell control tab. Grid input, this again you're probably not going to need to edit. It defaults to 120/240 split phase, 60 Hertz, just like we have here in the States. If you do want to do a 3-phase install, this is where you would go to change your mode to 208 3-phase. One system can do 2 of the 3 phases, or you can bump it up to 2 or 3, 6 or 9, 12Ks to do balanced 3-phase sellback and backup.
Real quick, we're about to do one of those with 3 12Ks.
Yeah.
So this is where we would come to do that.
So if you're doing 3, you would want to put them all in 120/208 mode, and you would also want to put them into parallel, which I skipped over before. But if you wanted to put them in parallel, you'll go to Basic Setup, and you're going to go over to the Parallel tab, and then you'll select Parallel, and there's going to be one master. Well, actually, it depends. So if you're doing 240, there's one master, and then the rest are slave units.
It's gonna be
With 208, you're going to have, and you have 3 units?
3 of them.
So you'll have 3 master units. So there's going to be master 01 with this number right here. These are very important. You can't skip these numbers or it'll make everything go wonky. You need to do 1, 2, 3, not 1, 3, 5 or something.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. So master number 1 will be for phase A. Master number 2 will be phase B, and master number 3 will be phase C.
Awesome.
Now it's different if you have 6, and it's different if you have 9. So if you want to learn more about, just give us a call. We have another video on that. I think I did a webinar on it a little while back too. Anyways, so this is where you would go to change that.
Awesome.
So,
and will we need the Cat5 cable to connect?
so if you're going to do parallel installs, you will need to put them in parallel in the software and also connect them with communication cables.
So if this is master 1, I would hit this one to that one. And do all 3 of them need to connect?
Yeah,
Or
it's a daisy chain. So if this one is like,
this is master 1?
well, the way personally I like to do it from left to right, so I do 1, 2, 3. But you can do 1, 2, 3 if you want.
So we could just do 1, 2, and that's it.
Yeah, so this cable would go from here to here, and then this cable would go from this parallel port to the one over
And
here.
that's master 1, 2, 3, and then you would also have
Do
for
we
the
need
next
that one to be
phase.
connected to this one?
Well, these are in parallel, so you're daisy chaining it.
Gotcha.
There's just
we're fine.
one
We'll
cable
be fine.
between
I get
each.
it.
Yeah,
I get it. And this is with the 15s stuff. We're gonna have 3 15s.
Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And so we'll go here to here, and then boom to boom. We'll be fine.
Mhm.
Awesome.
We have 3 options here. So as we already went over, you can do the 3-phase settings here. Default is 120/240 split phase, and then you can actually do 220 single phase. If you're going to do that in one of your installs, please make sure that you remove the system neutral reference. This has to come out if you're going to program the Sol-Ark to 220 single phase. Just as a little side note there.
Every time.
Every time, yeah.
Gotcha.
So clamp that down. Next up we have the frequency volt tab. This is going to be used for mostly in places like Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Bahamas, Virgin Islands, all that good stuff. A lot of the smaller grids require these settings. If they are required in your area, actually I think even Massachusetts requires these now. But these are your frequency volt, high voltage, low voltage, ride-throughs, and ramp rates. You can adjust these here. These are a bunch of numbers you're going to get from your utility if you need them. You just make them match. We have a bunch of references, reference material in the manual as well. in the Sol-Ark manual, you can go through and look up like what the Puerto Rico settings are, what the Hawaii settings are, and you'll be good to go. Just make a match. Power factor, probably 95% of the time you won't have to touch anything on this screen. So as part of the regular commissioning, probably don't have to do this. If you ever do have to come in here, sometimes enabling QV, which stands for dynamic power factor, that can deal with some kind of unusual events sometimes that happen when you're off grid and you have a bunch of sometimes it happens with a whole bunch of LED lights, sometimes they flicker a little bit. This will usually fix that. Anyways, so these are kind of more obscure settings.
Are those going to be altered after the installation? So after they've had the system up and running for quite some time?
Yeah, normally you wouldn't, normally this particular tab you're not going to be changing on your first day. It's only if something was a little bit wonky or something and you needed to adjust it later on.
Gotcha.
So, and that does it for the grid setup tab. Lastly, let's go ahead and go to the system alarms. This is a really straightforward thing. There's nothing to edit in here. This is just going to be a chronological list of all the error codes, alarms, and alerts that you've gotten on the unit. So, not everything that pops up in here is necessarily going to be an actual error code. Like, for instance, there's a few F13s on here. That just means that we changed the grid mode. So if you go from 122.40 to 208 mode, you're going to get an F13. Looks like an alarm, but it's really just a notification. There's also a couple other ones like parallel system stop. A lot of times that can just be like, someone else. You turn off one of the other units. This one's going to say, hey, I can't talk to my other friends here in parallel. So it's really a notification, that kind of thing. Or if you overload the unit, you're going to get like an F18, so on and so forth. If you have an error, I guess I might as well mention, if you do get an overload, you can get up to 5 of them in a row, and the system's just going to reboot automatically. So if you do overload the unit, don't worry, don't do anything. It'll just power back up on its own after about 2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes, and it'll only stay off if it gets 5 overloads in a row. So you don't really have to worry about that too much if you're just living off grid doing your thing.
And if it does overload more than 5 times, do we have to call Sol-Ark to make sure that...
You don't have to call us. It just requires a manual reboot. So you just come and hit the power button, wait for it to turn off, turn it back on. It takes a few minutes, but generally speaking, though, if you did get 5 overloads in a row, we want you to go figure out why that happened, so it doesn't overload again. Yeah. But if it's less than 5 times in a row, don't worry about it. It'll just take care of it. So
easy.
Can you show us where to turn off the alarm? I know you were talking about system alarms.
Yeah. So if you can't turn off alarms, you can turn off a couple specific alarms, and you can turn off the beep.
The beep.
The beep.
How do you turn the beep off?
Beep. So the beep is in basic setup in the first tab called display. Gotcha. And there's a little checkbox here called beep. And if it's checked, the system will allow itself to beep. And if it's unchecked, it will not beep.
Beautiful.
So that's a big one.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, if you're changing a setting, you do need to press OK for it to stay. Okay. Well, that's the 12K. We're about to jump over to the 15K over here. We'll see how any differences there might be. All right.
Look at that thing, huh? Just a little bit bigger.
Man.
It's a little bit bigger. This one's a demo unit, so it's hollow on the inside here. But normally there's some wires here. But yeah, it's 15K, super cool. It's bigger, it's better. But in terms of commissioning it, it's if you've done a 12K, you can do a 15K the same amount of time. So the screen is going to be very familiar. The only difference is that these numbers can get bigger than they can on a 12K. But the layout's going to be the same. The settings menu is still this gear icon in the upper right-hand corner. All the menus are the same. So the only real difference is that you're going to be able to set the charge and discharge and like the watts and all that kind of stuff to higher values than you would be able to with a 12K. But everything's in the same place. All the settings do and mean the same thing. So it's a really simple thing to go from a 12 to a 15K. And for that matter, you can go to an 8 or a 5 as well. They all have identical user interfaces.
So that means that the beep's still in the same place.
Beep is in the same place, yeah.
Thank goodness.
The best thing about this thing is that 200 amp pass-through, right?
Yeah, you get 200 amps of pass-through from the grid through to the loads.
We love it.
You can AC couple 19 kilowatts to it.
And looks like the generator port's bigger. Does that mean we can put a 22 kW Generac in there now? Or?
Oh, easily, yeah. This is a 100 amp input for the generator.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
and it has
Really, I didn't know that. That's
yeah. So 100 amps on the gen, 200 amps on the grid, 200 amps to the load, and then the battery side we can do 275 amps to the battery, either to or from the battery. 3 MPPTs, each of them can do 26 amps for a total of about 19 kW DC coupled. And then, like I said, you can do 19 kW AC coupled, and you can do both of those at the same time if you want for just a ton of power through one unit.
Gotcha.
It's amazing.
So, yeah, these are your battery breakers.
And then this guy's missing the breakers that are right here, huh?
Yeah, there's a big breaker right here, a 200 amp breaker that would normally be there
Will usually be there.
on the live ones.
Gotcha.
And we give you 2 sets of inputs on the battery so that you can use 2-watt wire instead of having to get like 350 kcml for 275 amps.
Yeah,
You.
Guys, we were fortunate enough to come out here, invited out by Sol-Ark. We really thank them for the training. We are all over Texas, from El Paso to Longview, Dallas, Austin, Houston. That's where our corporate office is. Please give us a call if you got any needs for solar. If your energy bill is too high, if you're wanting to go off grid, please give us a call. Sol-Ark, thank you for having us out today.
Absolutely.
We really enjoyed the training. I think we've learned a lot. We've installed quite a few of these systems, but having the training always helps. And guys, in case you forget,
SunshineRenewableSolutions.com, 832-280-8838. Call us now.
and also our website's sunshinerenewable.com. You can reach us there as well.
And if you guys would like to sign up for some training, if you're a customer or end user, feel free to join one of our webinars. Those are listed on our website. We usually do at least 4 of those a month. Feel free to jump on. And if you're an installer, feel free to reach out to training@sol-ark.com and reach out to us and set up one of our trainings here. You can get the same training and more. We offer several different courses: commissioning, split phase, 3-phase, parallel, 15K, all that. You can sign up for those classes by emailing us at training@sol-ark.com. And if you'd like to learn anything else, reach out to us anyways. Call us up, 972-575-8875.